All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. Welcome to the last Monday. Yes, it's the last Monday. Um, so what we'll do today, as you probably know, we're going to start presentations. Well, we were going to start presentations tomorrow on Tuesday, which of course you will need to be ready for. But one person is going to go. Good morning. One person is going to go today. Because they're going to be out of town for the next couple days and it's awkward. So she knows who she is. So in the second half of class, we'll get her to present, just to kind of take care of that little bit of business. But officially, we're starting tomorrow. So of course, be ready for that. But yeah, so for today, we'll do a little more social justice stuff, and then we will take a break. We'll come back from the break. And then Kayla will present to us. Yeah, good morning. Okay, so without further ado, let's check in with where we were on Thursday. Let's check in with where we were on Thursday. So, on Thursday, I introduced this kind of last idea to you, classism. We don't have a lot of time to kind of talk about it, and so it's going to be kind of squished. There might be a little bit more. If we finish our presentations early, I might have a little bit to share with you on Friday, but we'll just kind of see how the week kind of plays out. But anyway, we said here that classism is a form of oppression which has to do with socioeconomic power, right? And so I said, of course, that power in the sort of sociological definition is the ability for you to get what you want when other people want something different, right? And so, again, as usual, I use the example of quizzes. We had a quiz on Friday. You might not have wanted one, but one happened anyway, right? Because I have the power to do that, right? And so people, of course, can have all kinds of different power. I gave you the example of these three people here. It occurs to me that I should really have probably a woman up here too, but at the moment I don't. But of course, each of these people have a different kind of power, right? Their power comes from something different, right? Bill Gates on the far left, his power comes from his finances, right? He is ridiculously wealthy because he's the founder of Microsoft, right? He has a wild amount of money. And that allows him to do all kinds of things, right? It allows him to get all kinds of things that he might want. The guy in the middle, of course, is the Dalai Lama. He's the head of Buddhism and Buddhists worldwide. He's also kind of a political leader for the country of Tibet, where he's from. He has social power, right? He's basically the head of a religion or a spiritual kind of philosophy. A lot of people regard him as kind of a wise person, a man of peace. And so, when the Dalai Lama speaks, lots of people listen to him, right? Turns out he has a lot of money too, but his power doesn't really come from his money. His power comes from his kind of social standing. And then here, of course, we have Justin Trudeau. Justin's the Prime Minister of Canada. That's a political office, and it's an office that holds a lot of political power, right? So Justin has political power. He also has a little bit of financial power too. He comes from a pretty well-off family. He also has some social power. His dad was Prime Minister of Canada in the 1970s and 80s, so people kind of knew who he was long before he ever thought about being Prime Minister. So he's got a little, different types of power. Most of his current power comes from his political office, though, right? So you can have one or the other, or you can have kind of a mixture of both, right? So political power, financial power, and again, social power can be a little bit variable, right? So lots of celebrities have social power, right? Because people listen to them because of who they are, right? Because they're, an Instagram influencer, or they're a YouTuber, or they're a movie star, or a musician, right, or a writer. All of those people have varying degrees of social power. So we said, of course, classism is the kind of oppression of people who do not have socioeconomic power by those who do, right? So usually what we're kind of thinking of here are the 1%, right? The people who are at the very top of society, who are kind of creating society in a way that benefits them, right? And kind of works to the disadvantage of the rest of us, right? We said on Thursday that classism, like all forms of oppression, is held in place by ideology, right? There are beliefs out there that help to keep things the same, right? They help to maintain the status quo. They help us to, imagine that the way of things is natural, right? And so sometimes we might think that people who have a lot of social or political or financial power, we might think they're better than us, they're smarter than us, they might be better looking than us, and we kind of look up to them, and we make the assumption that they're at the top because they deserve to be, right? Because they're special in some way, right? That they are talented, or they're, very, very hardworking, or just somehow they're better than us, right? And in some cases, there's grains of truth to that, right? Some people have worked very hard. Some people are very talented, right? But again, not everyone who finds themselves at the top of the ladder is there because of their own effort or their own merit, right? Sometimes they're there because of the family they were born into, or what they look like, or they were in the right place at the right time, and it allows them to kind of be at the top of the social ladder, right? So again, people at the top are able to, just like in all forms of oppression, they're able to create society in a way that works for them, right? They're able to define what's normal. They're able to define what's cool, right? Often it's celebrities and rich people and wealthy people. They're the ones that define what's cool, right? What's sophisticated, what's elegant. Usually it's not the people at the bottom, right? People at the bottom tend not to be cool, right? Because they're not able to define that. We said we can divide a society up into a number of different categories. These are all a little bit arbitrary, right? People just make them up in order to help describe what's going on. You can divide societies into 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 or whatever kind of makes sense to you. Here, just for the sake of argument, I didn't divide it. I used a classification of 4 divisions, right? And so there's the owning class, the people at the top. They've inherited wealth, they've inherited money. They don't really have to work in some cases, but sometimes they do. Sometimes they have a job, but they don't really need to have that job. Often, again, they're connected to rich, wealthy, powerful people. Sometimes they have the ability to influence government, right? Moving a little bit down, you've got middle class. Sometimes these are called white-collar jobs. They're professional jobs. Sometimes you need degrees or advanced degrees. People are paid a little more here. They often own their own homes. They can afford to send their kids to university, right? That's this group. Moving a little bit further down, you've got working class, people who have less education. Sometimes they have high school and college, or sometimes they have high school and they've been trained as something, a carpenter or a welder or a plumber or an electrician. They use their bodies often to do their work as well as their mind. And again, they have a little bit less income, right? So they may not own their homes, they may just rent. They may or may not be able to send their kids to university, right? They're a little bit lower. And then you have people at the bottom, right? Below the poverty line. And so again, I said that in countries around the world, the poverty line kind of moves, right? Because $20 in Canada is not $20 in Equatorial Africa, right? There's a difference in value, right? But the idea here is that if you're below the poverty line, you cannot afford basic food, clothing, and shelter, right? You cannot afford all of those things at the same time, right? And so people are like this they're homeless, or they're sometimes homeless. Sometimes they're, moving around, staying with friends because they don't have a place to live. Sometimes they're going periods without food. They're struggling, right? They don't have enough to meet even their basic, even their basic needs, right? So I have a question for you. What do you think, how do you think wealth divides up in a country like the United States, for instance? So I mentioned we have these 4 categories here: the owning class, the middle class, the working class, and the poor. If all the money in the world, or all the money in the United States, okay, all the property, all the money, all the bank accounts, everything, if you took that and you reduced it to $100, okay, there's 100 representative dollars, how many dollars do you think the owning class has versus the middle class versus the working class versus the poor? How much do you think each group has? And keep in mind population, because who do you think most of the United States is? The what?
White people.
The what?
The white people.
No. We'll leave. Yeah, it's of these classes. Who do you think is the most people fit into which category?
Owning class.
Really?
Definitely.
Most people in the United States are super wealthy? Well, maybe not by American standards, I would say.
Maybe middle. I think middle.
Middle, okay.
It is either owning or working.
Owning or working, okay. So nobody in the middle class, not much, okay. And then what about poor people?
A lot.
Okay.
I'm not sure how much though, but
Not a tiny fraction, maybe. Okay. Back to my original question then. How do you think, if all the money in the United States was reduced to just $100, how many of those dollars are being held by the owning class versus the middle versus the working versus the poor? What do you think?
It's like 90% is for owning class, and then
Okay.
from that 10%, basically about 6% is for the middle class, and
Okay.
then maybe 3 for working class, and then 1 or 2 for poor class.
Okay, so 96, 3 and 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. What do you think, Eunice?
I'm not sure. But maybe owning is like 20-25.
Okay.
Middle class probably 40, 45, and between 40 and 50.
Okay.
Working class maybe is 10-ish.
Okay. 25, 45, 10. So that's 80, I think.
Actually, make the working class
Or is it 90?
20. So
Okay.
then poor is probably 10.
Okay.
I'm not sure though.
Okay. So interesting. Some fairly different estimates between the two of you, which is okay. But it's really hard to know, right? Especially when we don't have, I haven't really told you, how much of the United States fits into each category. And again, these categories are kind of, the lines between them are fuzzy, right? There's some people that are working class, right? They're mechanics or electricians or something, but because of their specialty, they can make a lot of money, right? They can make more than me, which, I probably fit into the middle class, right? I have advanced degrees. I, kind of do an office-y type job sort of thing, kind of. So I kind of fit into the middle class, but there's definitely working class people that make more than me just because of they have a skill that people need, right? And so the boundaries between these two are kind of fuzzy. And again, I haven't really told you what the percentage is for the population. But let me help you out with this. So I'm just gonna open Microsoft Teams here for a second.
I think owning classes like has old money people.
There, yeah. What does it mean? What does that mean? Old money.
Like the family business is makes a lot of money and it's been running for a very long time, like passed down generations to generations.
Right.
There might be like new money also in the owning class, but
Yeah, old money. Yeah, there's the old money, new money distinction, right? And old money is people who, yeah, they inherit their wealth, right? They have,
they're like low key kind of
United
rich.
Kingdom family.
it's like the what?
United Kingdom family.
Yeah, right. They're, I'm just gonna pop this into. There we go. Yeah, they inherit their wealth from the past, right? So they have ancestors who were rich. They have a family company that's been around for decades and decades, right? And that company, you know, is worth a lot of money and people own shares in it. So yeah, that's kind of old money, right? New money is people who have just become wealthy, right? So I think, you know, Elon Musk, I think, is new money. Yeah, so he doesn't come from a rich background. He's wildly rich now, but he doesn't come from there, right? Donald Trump, he's old money, right? His father owned a very successful real estate business, passed down to Trump. It's worth billions. Yeah, that's old money, right? And again, some money is older than Trump, right? I think that Trump's grandfather was not a wealthy guy, especially, but his father was, and now he is. But there's also families for whom it goes back even further, right? And the Royals are an excellent example. Their wealth goes back hundreds of years, right? Okay, so to talk about this, I want to show you um, a quick video talking about income inequality in the United States. So I put the link in Microsoft Teams, and I'm just going to ask online people to watch, or no, sorry, I put the link in the live chat of YouTube. Sorry about that. I put the link in there, and I'll ask you online people to watch it, and then we'll come right back and talk about what we've seen. So I'll see you in just a moment.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard
So Eunice, how you feel about that? You were a little off in your guess. As were you. You were closer, Arad. You were closer. But even, when you started talking, I was like, oh, that's pretty. That sounds pretty dark. But still, like I think you were still short of what it is, right? Like it's worse than. It's certainly worse than Eunice guessed, and I think it's a little bit worse than what you guessed too, right? And that's pretty. Whoops. That's pretty. Is that shocking to you or not so much? Shocking? Yeah, right? There's a pretty extreme inequality, right? And this is an interesting type of oppression to talk about because, when we talk about inequality between men and women, if we talk about inequality between Christians and non-Christians, or inequality between white people and non-white people, those things are really hard to get numbers on, right? And I, when we talked about racism, I tried to show you some stats at the end of racism to show you, that white people tend to be much better off in the United States than non-white people by a few different measures, right? By life expectancy and average income and, the percent of the population in prison. But here, this is a way that you can really measure exactly what that inequality is, right? The other ways you're kind of measuring it, you're measuring it by proxy, right? You're taking another measure and you're kind of assuming that it's racial inequality. But here, economic inequality is economic inequality, right? You can actually measure the dollars and cents, right? So I think that's, like I'm shocked every time I've seen this video before. I'm shocked every time I see it, right? That's a massive, massive inequality, right? Some people have, a ridiculous amount of money, while a pretty significant amount of people have basically nothing at all, right? They have they haven't, their net wealth is zero, or it's less than zero. Right? And again, I don't know, that's pretty extreme. Why do you think that's the case in the United States? It's similar in other countries, of course, maybe not quite as bad, but why do you think things are so unequal in the United States?
Because those who are in power, they don't want let anybody to get into power because they lose their power.
Right, so people.
This power could be the money, could be the, anything.
Yeah. And that's true of really any type of oppression, right? The dominant group tends to hold power.
That's why there is no equality, and then everyone tries to say like, there has to be an actually equality in everything. I don't know, like in any cases like woman, man, and then financial, anything, but they don't actually want it. They just pretend to, it's just like, I want equality, but nobody wants equality. Like equality is on the way. Nobody is like, in this world nobody is equal to each other. So, and nobody likes equality. They're just pretending to like.
Okay, so
Nobody wants to lose his power or her power.
that's true, right? So
To share with others.
yeah, people in the dominant group hold power, right? And part of what they try to do is hang on to what they have, right? In order for equality to work, especially when you have extreme inequality like here, people have to give up wealth, right? This isn't a case of necessarily getting more, well it is, of getting more to the people who have nothing, but that more is going to have to come at the expense of the people at the top, right? The richest people have to give up part of what they have in order to ensure that people at the bottom have more, right? And as Arad mentions, that's often not what people are motivated to do, right? Often they are motivated to hang on to what they have in all cases, right? And that's
Why we cannot reach equality, because throughout over time, like it has been so many years that people are looking for equality and then trying to put some effort on it, but why it doesn't get a result, right? Like, so what happens? Nothing, because they're not real. They're just fake.
They
They're
do,
totally fake.
yeah, they do interesting kind of psychological tests, and it's, gosh, how do they do it? I think it's like it's like a gambling test, right? And so it's like, okay, Eunice, you're going to pick a number. I'm going to think of a number between 1 and 10, and you're going to choose that number, okay? Now, if you pick the number correctly, then I'll give you $20. If you pick it incorrectly, then you'll lose $20, okay? Most people don't want to play, right? Because humans are risk averse and loss averse, right? Our brains are kind of tuned to be more sensitive to losing things than they are to actually gaining them. So yeah, there's a chance that Eunice will win $20, and she might choose to play this game and see if she'll win, but her brain, and most other human brains as well, will be more sensitive to the loss. And so a lot of people won't play that game because even if they can afford to lose the $20, even if it's not a thing, they will avoid playing a game like that because we don't like to lose things, humans, right? Even when there's a possibility that we might gain, we are more loss averse. And we tend to remember those things more strongly as well, right? Things where we played a game like that, where we gambled and lost, we tend to remember those more strongly than instances where we gambled and we won, right? And lots of people, you'll hear them call in for a contest on the radio, and they're like, oh, I've never won anything before. And it's like, you probably have, but you just forgot, right? Because we tend to forget those things. But places where we lose, we definitely remember that, right? So yeah, our brains are kind of wired to be loss averse, right? People don't want to lose what they have, right? Even if it's billions of dollars that, if you have 20 billion and you lose 4, I mean, that's a lot of money, but is there a really measurable difference for you? I'm thinking not, but that's speaking from someone who doesn't have $20 billion, right? Now, yeah, so the income distribution here in the US is not great, right? We have an ideal picture of wealth distribution, which people selected. We have kind of the impression that people have, which actually I think is kind of it's interesting, even though, like Arad and Eunice, even though you were the only two who kind of answered, I think that ideal, that center graph, is probably a good average of your two positions, right? So that's kind of what people think it is, but again, they're off, right? A huge amount of money is in the hands of just a few people. Right? Now, yeah, so things are clearly unequal. How do we get to this state? Right? How do we get to this place? And so, again, to talk about that, I have another short video that talks about economic inequality and kind of how we get there, or how we've kind of arrived at the place that we're at. So I'm gonna, whoops, what did I just do? Oh, I created a new scene. Interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put that link in the YouTube chat as well, and then we'll watch this video and we'll come back. Again, this video is going to talk a little bit about why things are so unequal and why they continue to be so. And so this is true of the United States, but it's also it also has a global angle to it as well, because the income inequality we see in the United States is also reflected globally, right? Some countries are very rich and very wealthy, some countries less so, right? Okay, so let's watch this and then we'll come right back, okay, people?
For 40 years, the U.S.-led global economy has produced an enormous improvement in human welfare. Since 1981, the proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty on less than $1.90 per day has fallen from 42% to 10%. But in countries with advanced economies, inequality of income and wealth has surged. And nowhere has it surged more than in the U.S., where reliance on free market forces has been strongest. That magnifies rewards for those at the top and leaves most others behind. The trend helps those with higher levels of education and hurts the less educated. It lifts residents of major cities while leaving those in small towns behind. For growing numbers of Americans, it's just harder to get ahead. Why has this happened, and what are the consequences? Here are 5 causes. The digital revolution creates enormous wealth for those with the skills and preparation to take advantage, but it eliminates what economists call middle skill jobs. Computer software and industrial machines now fill roles from clerical tasks to routine manufacturing that once produced middle-class incomes for workers without college degrees.
One of those forces is technological progress that has increased the value of abstract problem-solving, interpersonal communication, organizational skills, things that highly educated workers tend to be very capable of. It has simultaneously devalued a lot of cognitively intensive but repetitive tasks in offices and production lines, and so kind of hollowed out the set of job activities available to non-college workers and sort of pushed them arguably downward into personal services, food services, cleaning, security, transportation, repair, where their skills are more interchangeable with other workers and where there's less of a return to experience over the life cycle. And so that has contributed to downward pressure and wage pressure and economic insecurity for the less educated. So it's really kind of created a great world for the highly educated and a much less economically secure and inviting world for people who don't have high levels of education.
Competition from emerging economies like China's, combined with reduced trade barriers, have further reduced prospects for workers without advanced skills. That's had devastating consequences in sectors such as textiles and furniture and leather goods.
The biggest economic story of the century, and certainly of the last 50 years, has been China's rise. China going from a poor and backward country in perpetual political and economic crisis to a frontier manufacturer with pretty well-educated, highly available, skilled labor using modern technology. So China marched up the productivity technology frontier between 1980 and the present at a rate almost unseen in history, and because it was so vast, because it had so many people, so many resources, so much land, it could become, a manufacturer for now at this point more than 20% of all world manufacturing value added. And that's not a function of trade deals. That's primarily a function of internal developments in China, the decision to allow free mobility of labor, to adopt Western technology and foreign direct investment, and to start trading with the world. And that had a big effect on the United States even in the 90s. But when China joined in 2001, that further opened the floodgates, and that had a dramatic accelerant effect on the rate at which competition entered the U.S. Market for manufactured goods and the rate of decline of U.S. manufacturing employment as a result of that. Over the course of just 7 years, about 20% of all U.S. manufacturing jobs disappeared. And then it fell by another cumulative 11 percentage points during the Great Recession. So effectively 1 in 3 manufacturing jobs no longer existed that had existed around 2000.
Breakthrough firms such as Apple and Amazon now attract revenue across the world, which produces immense jackpots for the executives who lead them and for the American cities they call home.
If you create the innovation and you have the global product market, you're going to have much larger earnings than in a previous generation. There is increasingly divergence in economic growth and economic outcomes across places in the US. And so there are just along with these superstar workers and these superstar firms, we now have superstar cities in our increasingly winner-take-all economy.
Meanwhile, the share of workers represented by labor unions has dropped by half, shrinking their power. The lowest paid workers have seen the buying power of the minimum wage drop, as the government has not increased it to keep pace with inflation.
Fewer than 70% of men with a high school degree or less are working. The eroded value of the minimum wage in many cases, the decline in unionization, things that have otherwise sort of hurt workers' bargaining power in ways that amplified their weakened bargaining power just coming from these external forces where they were already, competing with technology or workers from lower wage countries, for example.
The shifting power balance has rewarded the wealthiest even more through policies in government and private institutions, from tax changes that increase their income to college admissions procedures that open doors for their children above others.
Actresses Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin are headed from the red carpet to federal court.
13 parents and one coach who have pleaded guilty.
The market incentives inequality creates for hard work and risk-taking helps make America's economy dynamic, but it also imposes costs.
You need some inequality. The problem is when that dynamism at a point in time gives rise to dynasticism, such that the next generation doesn't get an equal footing, such that kids of affluent parents, even if they're are mediocre talent, get to go to the best schools and get access to the most after-school investment, the most training, and so on. And talented kids from less affluent families don't get to go to good schools. They don't get invested in the same way, and that's a loss for all of us. That's not just a loss for them. That means our society will be less productive.
And it fuels the nonstop turmoil in American politics. Voters have thrown out the party in control of the White House or one chamber of Congress in 6 of the past 7 national elections. 2020 promises to be just as contentious.
I think we're seeing that loud and clearly in the sort of politics of the past few years. People are increasingly likely to report that they believe the system is rigged against them. This is damaging both for the functioning of our democracy, but I actually think also for the functioning of our economy. We're going to see people in increasing numbers sort of dropping out of our mainstream climb to economic success. And so we've got this economic malaise, and now we have this social malaise going along with it, and it's leading to large, loud political cries for completely, I think, upending our capitalist system.
So a couple of important things, right? First of all, technological change, right? Have we talked about this? Yeah, we talked about this a little bit already, but the idea that a huge number of jobs are being replaced by machines, robots, artificial intelligence, right? And the sort of skill set that you need in the workforce is changing, right? So if you want to be successful, you need to be able to do things that machines don't do very well, right? Flexible organization, being flexible, being organized, creative thinking, interpersonal skills, those are innovating. Those are the kind of things that machines don't do very well, right? Globalization, we said that many manufacturing jobs have moved out of the US, right? And that's created kind of a hole, right? Because there was a section of people in the middle part of the economy, the sort of true middle class that made their living manufacturing, and now those jobs are gone, right? And as you can see, huge numbers of those jobs have gone to China. And the people who used to work in the United States, they've kind of slid down a little bit, right? They talked about the rise of superstars, right? So huge global companies making huge profits means the people who own them and the people who run them also make huge money, far more than they they did before, right? Failing labor, right? So trade unions are not as common as they were in the past. And finally, seizing the advantage, right? So people who are wealthy, whether they're individuals or whether they're companies, are able to rig the system to their advantage. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here, and then when we come back, Kayla is going to present. So online people, what's going to happen for you is I'm going to have you sign in through Zoom, okay? And so I'll put a Zoom link into Microsoft Teams in just a moment. I'm going to end the live stream because I'm sure Kayla doesn't want to present to the entire world. I'm sure she'd just rather present to the class itself. And so I'll end the live stream here. A Zoom link will appear in Microsoft Teams, and then you'll sign in to that, okay? So we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, I'll connect to you through Zoom, okay? So online people, we'll see you in just a few minutes, but we'll just take maybe a 10 or so minute break before that. Yeah. It's going to be random. So can you what? Nope. It's random choice.